You buy that patch at a surplus store, old man. The voice carried across the diner sharp as broken glass, cutting through the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of lunch traffic. A few heads turned. Most pretended not to. Staff Sergeant Cole Vance stood beside the corner booth with the easy arrogance of a man too used to being feared, one hand resting on the back of the vinyl seat, the other pointing toward the weathered patch stitched crooked on the old veteran's faded field jacket. Elias Mercer looked up slowly from his black coffee, his pale eyes calm as winter water. At 82, his shoulders had bent with age, but nothing in the way he held himself suggested weakness. His silence seemed to irritate Cole more than defiance ever could. "I asked you a question," Cole said, louder now, letting the room hear it. "That patch doesn't belong to any unit I've ever seen. Looks fake." The two Delta operators behind him smirked. Young. Broad-shouldered. Restless with the confidence of men who believed history began when they arrived. Outside the diner windows, heat shimmer rolled over the parking lot in wavering sheets, and beyond it Fort Liberty's distant control tower stood against a washed Carolina sky. Elias lowered his cup with careful hands. The ceramic touched the saucer with a quiet click that somehow pulled more attention than Cole's raised voice. "Some things," he said at last, his voice low and rough with age, "weren't made to be recognized by everyone." One operator laughed under his breath. Cole leaned closer. "That right? Because where I come from, men wear patches they earned." The word earned hung there with accusation sharpened inside it. Stolen valor. Fraud. The old poison wrapped in modern language. The waitress froze halfway through refilling another table. Even the ceiling fan seemed louder. Elias said nothing. His fingers rested lightly against the patch, tracing worn thread almost unconsciously. It was a black serpent worked into a faded circle, part of one edge torn away as though something had once completed it. Cole noticed. His expression changed. Curious now. Predatory. "Funny thing," he said, tapping the missing corner with one finger, "looks incomplete. Like somebody ripped off the part that mattered." The touch was brief. Casual. But something moved behind Elias Mercer's eyes, old and distant as thunder beyond the horizon. For a second he did not seem in the diner at all. Tyler Boone, the quieter operator near the counter, saw it and felt an unease coil in his chest. It was not fear. It was recognition without memory. Something wrong in the way this was unfolding. But Cole pressed harder. "Tell me what unit wore it." Elias looked directly at him. The diner felt smaller. "The ones who wore it," he said, "stopped talking about it 50 years ago." A man at the counter coughed and looked away. Someone's fork touched a plate and then even that sound disappeared. Cole smiled, but there was strain in it now. Convenient answer. He folded his arms. "How about this? If that patch means something, prove it." He stepped back just enough to make it a challenge instead of a threat. The room held its breath. Elias reached into his jacket pocket and touched something hidden there, and though nobody could see it, Tyler Boone noticed his hand tremble once, not from age but memory. Outside, a rotor thumped faint in the distance, almost too far away to hear. Elias lifted his eyes toward the window as if listening to something only he recognized. Then he said quietly, "Be careful what proof you ask for, Sergeant." And for reasons he could not explain, Tyler Boone suddenly felt as if the air inside that little roadside diner had changed, as though something enormous had just begun to move. Cole Vance let the silence stretch because he believed silence belonged to the man with control, but Elias Mercer wore it more naturally than he did. The old veteran leaned back against the cracked vinyl booth as sunlight drifted through the blinds in narrow bars across his weathered face, and for the first time Cole seemed to realize this was no ordinary old man cornered into embarrassment. "Prove it," Cole repeated, but the challenge had lost some of its edge. Elias studied him the way a man might study shifting weather over open country, patient and unreadable. Then he reached slowly inside his jacket and drew out A small leather pouch darkened by age, its surface creased like old saddle hide. He set it on the table without ceremony. Even Cole hesitated before opening it. Inside lay a tarnished metal tab no larger than a dog tag fragment, stamped with numbers worn nearly smooth, and beside it an old folded photograph yellowed at the edges. Cole lifted the photograph with 2 fingers. 5 young men stood beside a helicopter in tropical haze, uniforms faded by time, faces half-shadowed under jungle light. On each shoulder was the same serpent patch, but complete, the torn section on Elias's coat matching a missing arc in the emblem. Tyler Boone stepped closer, his pulse beginning to quicken. Something about the symbol stirred an old memory from a classified orientation years before, a slide shown for half a second and never discussed again. Cole scoffed, though less confidently now. Vintage souvenirs do not prove anything. Elias nodded faintly as though he expected that answer. No, he said. They prove memory. He lifted one finger and touched the torn edge of his patch. The rest has to be recognized. The diner had gone still enough to hear the refrigeration hum behind the pie case. A truck rolled past outside on the highway, tires hissing over warm pavement. Somewhere far off another helicopter beat the air. Tyler felt the sound settle into his chest. Cole looked down again at the photograph, his expression tightening. Who were they? He asked, almost despite himself. Elias did not answer directly. His eyes drifted toward the window, beyond the parking lot, beyond the base perimeter where summer haze shimmered over long pines. Ghosts, mostly. The words landed with a gravity none of the young operators understood but all of them felt. Cole set the photograph down harder than necessary. Pride pushed back against unease. Anybody can invent legends. He pointed toward the torn patch. What happened to the missing piece? For the first time a trace of emotion crossed Elias Mercer's face, not anger, not pain, but something older and quieter. Another man carried it away. Tyler's throat tightened. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone beneath the counter line and typed a discreet query into a restricted archive access he still retained through the unit. He entered the serpent insignia from memory. Access denied flashed first. Then another screen appeared with a red notice he had not expected to see. Phoenix Cell Archive. Restricted. His stomach dropped. He glanced up at Elias, then back to the screen. Cole noticed the movement. What are you doing? Tyler did not answer. His eyes were fixed on a line appearing beneath the warning. Surviving personnel status classified. Before he could scroll further, his phone buzzed in his hand. Unknown secure line. Tyler stared at it as though it had come alive. Across the table Elias Mercer watched him with the faintest knowing look. Cole frowned, confused now. Who is calling you? Tyler answered and said nothing for 3 long seconds. Then all color left his face. He stood rigid, listening. Finally he whispered only one word. Sir. And the air inside the diner seemed to grow heavier, charged with the quiet pressure that comes just before a storm breaks. Tyler Boone held the secure phone as though it weighed 50 pounds, his posture locked so rigid even Cole Vance felt the shift in gravity. The diner had gone silent except for the slow turn of ceiling fans and the soft hiss from the grill in the kitchen. Yes, sir, Tyler said, voice almost gone. He listened, eyes widening at each measured word from the unseen authority on the line. Then he straightened further, instinct overtaking thought, and answered, understood. He is still here. He lowered the phone but did not move. Cole stepped toward him. What is this? He demanded, though the confidence had drained from his voice. Tyler looked at him as if seeing him from very far away. You need to stop talking. The words landed harder than a shout. Cole stared, stunned less by the warning than by the fact it came from Tyler Boone, the most disciplined man on his team. Elias Mercer sat motionless in the booth, one hand resting near the leather pouch, his coffee untouched and cooling beside him. The old man seemed almost absent, listening to some older rhythm beneath the room's tension. Cole shook his head as though forcing control back into his hands. No. Somebody tells you to freeze and suddenly this turns into a ghost story. But even he could hear the hollowness in it. Tyler turned his phone screen toward him. The restricted archive remained open. The serpent insignia glowed faint against black. Beneath it now a line scrolled into view. Operation Phoenix Cell. Status sealed by Joint Command. Surviving field operators, 2. Cole read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. This could be fabricated. But his voice had softened into something nearer uncertainty. Tyler said nothing. He was staring at the old veteran's torn patch with dawning recognition. The missing section, he murmured. It was not damaged. Elias finally looked at him. No, he said. Shared. Outside the diner a black sedan rolled into the gravel lot without a sound dramatic enough to match the effect it produced. Tyler saw it first through the window and his breath caught. Government plates. Another vehicle behind it. Then a third. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just quiet arrival. Cole followed his gaze. Something primal tightened in his chest. The waitress by the counter whispered a prayer without knowing why. A gust stirred dust over the lot. The front door opened, bells above it giving a small ordinary chime absurdly gentle for the moment. A man entered in plain dark slacks and a light field jacket, silver hair cut close, posture so erect it seemed carved rather than carried. Age had touched him, but authority clung to him the way heat clings to asphalt in Carolina summer. No insignia showed, yet every instinct in the room understood rank had entered. Tyler stepped back instinctively. Cole did not. He simply froze. The newcomer's eyes moved across the room, found Elias Mercer, and stopped. In that instant something passed between them older than explanation. Elias rose slowly from the booth, not as an old man struggling to stand but as someone answering a call long expected. The newcomer walked forward, each footstep soft against the diner tiles. Cole opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, perhaps to apologize, but no words came. The man halted beside the table and without taking his eyes off Elias reached into his own jacket. He placed something small on the tabletop. A weathered cloth fragment. Black serpent stitching. The missing half. It aligned perfectly with the torn edge on Elias's patch. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Tyler felt the back of his neck prickle. Cole's face had gone pale. The older man spoke at last, voice low and steady. I wondered how long it would take someone to accuse you again, Eli. A faint smile touched Elias Mercer's face for the first time. Longer than I expected, Nate. Cole looked from one to the other, and the world he trusted seemed to tilt. Because in that moment he understood the patch had not changed everything. It had revealed everything. For several long seconds no one in the diner seemed willing to disturb the silence that had settled over the table. The two halves of the serpent patch lay joined between Elias Mercer and Nathan Holloway like something recovered from history itself, not cloth and thread but a living oath returned whole. Cole Vance stared as if the rules of his world had begun dissolving one by one. Tyler Boone did not blink. The older man they had mocked was no longer framed by the ordinary light of a roadside diner. He carried the strange gravity of buried things remembered. General Nathan Holloway, though dressed as any retired man might be, stood with the stillness of command too old to perform itself. He touched the rejoined patch lightly with 2 fingers. 47 years, he said, almost to himself. And you still kept your half. Elias gave a faint shrug. You told me not to lose it. The ghost of humor moved between them, but beneath it ran something far deeper. Cole found his voice at last. General, he asked, uncertain even using the word. Holloway turned his eyes on him. It was not anger Cole felt under that gaze. It was worse. Measured disappointment. You questioned whether he had earned the right to wear that insignia. Cole swallowed. Sir. I did not know. Holloway nodded once. That is often where arrogance begins. No one moved. Then the general lifted the joined patch from the table, and in that simple motion Elias's eyes drifted far away. The diner dissolved for him into another heat. Another sky. Humid jungle air clung to memory. Rotor wash stirred tall elephant grass. A younger Nathan Holloway knelt beside 5 men in a hidden clearing where no maps admitted they had ever stood. Rain tapped broad leaves overhead. Someone held up the serpent emblem stitched in black, newly cut in two with a field knife. One half stayed with the man leading extraction. The other with the one who stayed behind to hold the route open until dawn. No speeches had been made. Only a promise. If one survived, the other would be remembered. The memory receded as softly as fog burning off a Carolina morning. Elias blinked and was back beneath the diner lights. Tyler saw moisture gather at the old veteran's eyes but never fall. Holloway looked to him. You found the archive. Tyler nodded. Only part of it, sir. The general gave the faintest approving glance. That was more than most ever saw. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped back from the table and came to attention. Not theatrical. Not ceremonial. Precise. Instinctive. A salute carried not by rank but reverence. The room froze. Tyler's spine straightened involuntarily. Even the 2 young operators behind Cole stood rigid without understanding why. Elias Mercer returned the salute slowly, old hands steady as stone. Cole felt heat rise behind his eyes, though shame kept him silent. The waitress by the counter covered her mouth. A truck driver near the window removed his cap. No one had been instructed. Respect moved through the room on its own. Holloway lowered his hand. You asked for proof, he said to Cole. This is what proof looks like when history survives. Cole looked down at the patch on the table, then at Elias. Sir. I called you a fraud. Elias studied him for a long moment, then gave a tired, almost compassionate nod. And now you know not every quiet man is empty. Outside another government sedan pulled into the lot. Tyler noticed uniformed figures beginning to emerge. Something larger was arriving. But inside the diner all time seemed to hold around one impossible fact. The legend had not been uncovered by force, nor defended through argument. It had simply stood there in plain sight. Waiting for someone worthy enough to recognize it. The first uniformed men entered without announcement, and somehow their silence carried more authority than shouted commands ever could. 2 colonels in service dress paused just inside the diner door, removed their caps, and stood back as though crossing a threshold that demanded reverence. The ordinary lunch crowd watched in bewildered stillness as more arrivals gathered outside near the black sedans, not rushing in but waiting, as if some unspoken protocol had taken hold. Cole Vance felt the room slipping further beyond anything training had prepared him for. He had expected reprimand, perhaps humiliation. He had not expected history to summon witnesses. General Nathan Holloway remained beside Elias Mercer's booth, one hand resting lightly on the joined serpent patch. They heard the archive opened, he said quietly to Tyler Boone. That alone would have stirred old ghosts. Tyler looked toward the parking lot where another staff car rolled in under drifting heat haze. How many know about Phoenix Cell? He asked. Holloway's expression hardened with memory. Fewer every year. Elias lifted his coffee again at last, as though all of this disturbance had merely interrupted an ordinary afternoon. The gesture, so calm against the swelling significance around him, unsettled Cole more than any lecture. He stepped closer to the booth, stripped now of bravado. Sir, he said to Elias, struggling through the word, why keep silent all these years? Elias studied the dark coffee before answering. Because the men who talk loudest about honor usually understand at least. The line landed like a quiet verdict. Cole lowered his eyes. Through the front window Tyler noticed a figure emerging from the latest vehicle, a gray-haired command sergeant major he recognized from base ceremonial events, a man not known to appear anywhere without purpose. Yet he did not enter. He stood outside at attention facing the diner as though guarding sacred ground. Murmurs rippled among the customers. Someone whispered the old man must have been some forgotten war hero. Another said no ordinary veteran would bring generals to a roadside lunch. Counter. But it was the joined patch on the table that held every eye. Holloway lifted it and turned the inside seam toward Tyler. There, stitched beneath the fold, almost invisible with age, was a phrase in tiny faded letters. Hold the line until dawn. Tyler read it aloud barely above a whisper. The word seemed to open another chamber of silence. Elias's fingers rested over the cloth as if touching a grave marker. That was our promise, he said. Cole frowned. Hold the line for what? Elias gave him a long look. For men we never met. For futures we would never see. The simplicity of it struck harder than any tale of battlefield glory could have. This was not legend inflated by memory. It was duty reduced to its purest form. Outside, sunlight flashed across windshields. Then something unexpected happened. The command sergeant major at the curb raised his hand in formal salute toward the diner window. Another uniform outside followed. Then another. No order was given. It moved through them like current through wire. Tyler's throat tightened. Cole turned and saw a row of hardened men standing silent under Carolina heat, saluting an old man in a roadside booth. His chest seemed to hollow out. I mocked a man they honor like this, he said almost to himself. Holloway heard him. No, the general said softly. You tested whether reverence still survives in your generation. He glanced toward Tyler. And perhaps it does. Elias Mercer looked out the window at the saluting figures, but there was no triumph in his face, only sadness touched with gratitude. Too many names should be standing out there with them, he murmured. The room remained motionless until Tyler's secure phone vibrated again. He answered at once. His face changed as he listened. Yes, sir, he said. Then he looked up slowly at Holloway. Base command requests immediate honors formation at the old airfield. Even the general seemed taken by surprise. He turned to Elias. Looks like they intend to finish what should have happened decades ago. Elias gave a faint tired smile. Then I suppose lunch will have to wait. And with that, the quiet revelation inside the diner began turning into something far larger than any of them had imagined. The diner door opened wide and warm Carolina air rolled in carrying dust, jet fuel faint from the base, and something else harder to name, the feeling of ceremony gathering before anyone spoke it aloud. Elias Mercer rose from the booth with deliberate slowness, reaching for the old field jacket as though preparing for an ordinary errand rather than whatever unseen machine had begun turning around him. General Nathan Holloway took the joined serpent patch and, without flourish, pinned the restored emblem back onto Elias's shoulder where the torn seam had rested alone for nearly half a century. No one in the room missed the symbolism. Something broken had been made whole. Cole Vance stood rigid beside the table, every trace of swagger burned away. Sir, he said quietly, the word now carrying genuine weight, I should not walk beside you after what I said. Elias looked at him with that unsettling calm that had undone stronger men than Cole. Then walk beside me and learn. The word struck deeper than rebuke. Outside, the line of saluting figures parted as Elias stepped through the diner doorway. Conversations on the roadside stopped. Even traffic on the highway seemed distant and unreal. Tyler Boone moved to Elias's right, Cole to his left without being asked. Holloway followed half a pace behind, not leading but escorting. The symbolism was impossible to miss. In the gravel lot the command sergeant major lowered his salute and approached carrying a weathered green beret in both hands. He stopped before Elias. "This was held in archive storage under restricted custody," he said. "Request came down 10 minutes ago to return it to its owner." Elias took the beret as though touching an old friend. His thumb brushed a faded unit flash sewn near the band, and for an instant his gaze drifted again into memory. Tyler saw it happen. The old airfield rose in everyone's minds before they even reached it, a place half forgotten at the edge of the installation where old hangars sat under sun-bleached corrugated roofs and windsocks cracked in the heat. A convoy formed without command. Black sedans in front. Staff vehicles behind. As they drove through base roads lined with longleaf pines and weathered barracks, word spread faster than radio could carry it. Men paused on motor pools. Air crews stood near tarmac lines watching the procession pass. Some saluted without knowing why. Others somehow seemed to know exactly. Inside the lead sedan Cole sat across from Elias in uneasy silence until he finally asked, "What happened at dawn?" Holloway answered before Elias could. He held a route open alone long enough for 4 teams to make extraction. He said it with no dramatic emphasis, which made it sound even larger. Cole stared. And nobody knew. Elias looked out the window at a training range flashing by in summer light. Some things were meant to stay quiet. At the old airfield the convoy rolled to a stop. What waited there stole breath from everyone who stepped out. Along the cracked concrete apron, under a wavering flag in the hard blue southern sky, 2 full ranks of service members stood in formation stretching nearly 100 yards. Army. Air Force. Special Operations. Retired veterans in old ribbons. Active duty officers. Even mechanics still in coveralls at the far edge. The wind tugged at trouser legs and carried the distant hum of turbines. Tyler felt his pulse hammer. Cole looked almost frightened by the scale of respect summoned in a single hour. Then a bugler near the hangar lifted his instrument and a single clear note cut through the air. Every spine snapped straighter. Holloway turned to Elias. "They are here for the men who never got called home." Elias's face tightened, not with pride but with the burden of memory. He adjusted the returned beret beneath one arm. Then, as he stepped toward the formation, a young lieutenant at the front suddenly froze, staring at the restored serpent patch. His voice broke the silence in disbelief. "Phoenix Cell." The whisper moved through the ranks like wine through tall grass. And in that moment Cole Vance understood the revelation at the diner had only been the threshold. What waited here was not apology. It was legacy returned. The bugle note faded into a silence so complete even the range flags snapping in the wind seemed respectful. Elias Mercer stood before the formation beneath the hard Carolina sun, the restored serpent patch dark against his faded jacket, the returned beret held against his side. For a long moment he did not move. Neither did the hundreds before him. It was General Nathan Holloway who broke the stillness, stepping forward until his voice carried across the old concrete apron without ever needing to rise. "For 47 years, he said, this command archived a mission it could not publicly honor. Today that debt ends." His words moved through the formation like current through steel. Tyler Boone felt every man beside him stand a little taller. Cole Vance barely breathed. Holloway turned toward Elias. "You once held the line until dawn." He paused, looking across the assembled ranks. "Today they stand for you." At that, the command sergeant major gave a crisp signal. What followed seemed impossible in its precision. One entire rank of Delta operators came to attention. Then Rangers. Then aviators. Then the veterans in worn service caps. A rolling wave of salutes traveled down the 100-yard formation until every hand was raised. Cole's own arm moved before thought caught up. He stood saluting the man he had accused in a roadside diner hours before. Heat shimmer danced above the runway. Somewhere a C-130 droned high overhead, its distant engine note sounding almost ceremonial. Elias slowly returned the salute, and Tyler saw the old veteran's composure falter for the first time. Not weakness. Wait. Memory pressing through discipline. Then from the front rank stepped the young lieutenant who had whispered Phoenix Cell. In his hands he carried a weathered wooden case. He stopped before Elias and opened it. Inside rested a unit guidon finial topped with the same black serpent emblem, bronze dulled by decades. Murmurs stirred through older veterans in the rear. Holloway spoke softly. Recovered from storage this morning. Last surviving field marker. Elias reached toward it, fingertips brushing metal scarred by age. For an instant his eyes clouded with another dawn, another field, another promise made under rotor wash and rain. When he looked up again Holloway did something unexpected. He stepped back from the front of the formation and spoke not as a general but as a man repaying old honor. There is one more thing owed. He nodded toward Cole Vance. Every eye turned. Cole froze, pulse hammering. Step forward, Sergeant. The order struck like thunder. Cole obeyed, boots sounding too loud on the cracked apron. He halted before Elias, throat dry. Holloway's voice hardened. State what happened this morning. Cole swallowed. I mistook humility for deception, sir. Holloway waited. Cole looked at Elias, shame naked now. I dishonored a man I did not understand. Silence followed. Then Elias did not rebuke him. He lifted the old green beret and placed it into Cole's trembling hands. Gasps rippled softly through the ranks. Carry that for me while I stand, Elias said. Learn what wait feels like. It was not punishment. It was trust. And somehow that broke Cole more completely than condemnation could have. Tyler felt his chest tighten. Even Holloway's expression shifted. The bugler raised his horn again, but before the note sounded, movement stirred beyond the hangar. An elderly man with a cane, another retired veteran no one had noticed arrive, stepped from the shadows and called out in a voice weathered but strong. There were not two survivors. The words stopped the air. Heads turned. Elias Mercer went still as stone. The old man lifted his sleeve, revealing on his forearm a faded serpent circle. Whole. Unbroken. Holloway's face lost all color. Tyler's breath caught. Because the legend everyone believed complete had just opened again, and the deepest secret of Phoenix Cell had not yet been told. No one in the formation moved. Even the wind seemed to pause over the old airfield as the elderly stranger advanced with measured steps, cane striking faint against cracked concrete. He was lean where age had taken flesh, his shoulders narrow but upright, his silver hair bright in the hard sun. Yet it was the faded serpent insignia on his forearm that held every eye captive. Whole. Unbroken. Not a patch torn in half, but the original mark complete. Elias Mercer stared as if time itself had stepped out of concealment. The old man stopped 10 feet away and gave a tired half-smile. You still hold the line, Eli. The voice carried memory inside it. Elias's hand trembled once at his side. Thomas Reed, he whispered, almost disbelieving. The name passed through the ranks in hushed echoes. Holloway looked struck by something deeper than surprise. We were told you were lost. Reed nodded. That was convenient for many people. A dry humor touched the words, but beneath it ran old sorrow. Cole Vance stood frozen, still clutching Elias's green beret, feeling history widen beyond comprehension. Tyler Boone could barely process what he was seeing. 2 survivors had become 3. An archive once sealed had already begun unraveling. Reed lifted his cane and pointed lightly toward the serpent emblem in the lieutenant's display case. You brought back the field marker. Elias found his voice. We kept your watch. Reed smiled faintly. And I kept yours. He reached inside his worn jacket and drew out a folded envelope, edges brittle with age. He handed it to Holloway. This was meant for command if I ever came back. Holloway opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a yellowed operations roster. 5 names. Not 2 survivors. 3. And beneath them, a handwritten line in faded ink, "No man left unremembered." Tyler felt chills despite the heat. The old general looked up slowly, eyes wet now without apology. All these years, Reed gave a small shrug. Some of us were asked to stay buried. The words fell with quiet force. No one asked who had buried them. It no longer mattered. What mattered was what stood before them. Holloway turned to the formation. Present arms. The command rang out, and in one breathtaking motion every service member shifted into ceremonial salute again. But this time something greater happened. Elias Mercer stepped forward toward Thomas Reed. Without a word the 2 old men embraced, not dramatic, not sentimental, but with the simple weight of men who had once expected never to meet again. A stillness heavy as thunder settled over the runway. Several younger soldiers lowered their eyes. Even Cole's throat tightened. Reed leaned back and looked at him unexpectedly. "You." The one who doubted him. Cole managed, "Yes, sir." Reed studied the green beret in Cole's hands. "Good." Cole blinked, confused. Reed nodded toward Elias. "Every legend worth respecting survives a test." The word struck with strange mercy. Then Holloway gestured to the front rank. Delta operators stepped forward one by one and, without command, formed a corridor of honor stretching from the apron to the old hangar. Cole saw what was happening a heartbeat before everyone else. They were not escorting Elias Mercer alone. They were honoring the living remnant of Phoenix Cell. Tyler whispered, almost in awe, "A brotherhood reveal." As Elias and Reed walked between the silent corridor, every operator snapped to attention in perfect sequence. Boots struck. Arms rose. Salutes locked. The sound rolled like controlled thunder across concrete. Cole, standing among them, finally understood the full reversal. This was not merely respect returned to one forgotten veteran. It was an entire generation bowing before a legacy it had nearly let vanish. As the 2 old men reached the hangar threshold, Reed stopped and turned once more. "There is one name missing from that roster," he said. Holloway frowned. "There were 5. Reed nodded slowly. "There were 6. The words dropped like a hidden charge into stunned silence. Tyler's breath caught. Elias closed his eyes as if an old wound had opened. And suddenly everyone sensed the final truth of Phoenix Cell had not yet surfaced. The words "there were 6" lingered over the old airfield like a bell still ringing after the strike. No one moved for several breaths. Even the saluting rank seemed held inside that unfinished sentence. Elias Mercer opened his eyes slowly and looked at Thomas Reed with the weary recognition of a man carrying one last burden too long. "You were going to tell them," Elias said softly. Reed nodded. Today seemed overdue. General Nathan Holloway looked between them, the old certainty of command giving way to something almost humble. "Who was the 6th?" he asked. Elias reached into his field jacket and drew out the leather pouch first seen in the diner, the ordinary object that had started everything. He opened it and removed a second tarnished metal tab no one had noticed before, smaller than the first, worn nearly smooth by decades of touch. He placed it into Cole Vance's hand. "A medic," Elias said. "No rank worth impressing anybody. No legend attached to his name. He held frightened men together when steel and noise made reason disappear." Tyler Boone leaned forward as though hearing sacred testimony. "What happened to him?" Elias looked toward the distant tree line where summer wind moved through pines. "He never came home." Silence deepened. Reed spoke next. "He was the best of us. We split the patch in 5, but we carried his marker in pieces. Holloway stared at the metal tab in Cole's palm. Why was he never on the roster? Elias answered with a faint sad smile. Because history remembers commanders easier than caretakers. That line seemed to pass through every rank standing there. Cole looked down at the tab as if holding a truth larger than anything he had ever carried. Then, without being told, he stepped to the memorial stone near the hangar entrance, a weathered marker no one had paid much attention to before, and laid the tab there. Tyler joined him. Then the young lieutenant placed the Serpent Guidon beside it. One by one others followed. A pair of dog tags from a retired ranger. A challenge coin. A faded ribbon bar. Small offerings, silent acknowledgments that honor grows through remembrance. Holloway removed his own gloves and laid them down last. For the 6th, he said. The bugler lifted his instrument once more, and the notes that followed moved slow and clear over the runway, over old hangars and hot concrete, over men too disciplined to weep and yet unable to hide what stirred behind their eyes. When the final note faded, Elias turned to Cole. You asked for proof this morning. Cole nodded, unable to speak. Elias rested a hand on his shoulder. The rarest credentials were never worn to impress strangers. Cole swallowed hard. How do I carry that forward? Elias looked toward the rows of young operators standing in reverent stillness. By never mistaking quiet for weakness again. It was the lesson, plain and final. As afternoon light softened toward gold, the formation slowly dissolved, but not before every Delta operator in the corridor offered Elias and Thomas Reed a final salute. No order. No ceremony script. Just respect earned and recognized. Later, as the old airfield emptied and long shadows stretched across the cracked apron, Tyler found Cole still standing by the memorial stone. You all right? He asked. Cole looked at the small metal tab resting there. I came to test a fraud, he said. I met a legacy. Behind them Elias Mercer and Thomas Reed walked slowly toward the departing sedan, two old silhouettes against the lowering sun, speaking too quietly to hear. Holloway paused once, looked back at the airfield, and smiled to himself as though a debt had finally been settled. Years later men on that base would still tell of the day an old veteran was challenged in a roadside diner and an entire command stood at attention by sunset. But those who understood the story best did not speak of humiliation or revelation. They spoke of a torn patch made whole, a forgotten medic finally remembered, and a young operator who learned respect does not begin when greatness is proven. It begins when dignity is recognized before proof is ever asked. Some salutes last a lifetime.